February 1995, one of the most respected financial institutions in the world simply ceased to exist. Not because of a war, not because of a recession, not because of any outside force at all, because of one man, one trading account, and a secret that kept growing until it swallowed everything. Barings Bank had survived the Napoleonic Wars. It had helped finance the Louisiana Purchase. It had outlasted 2 world wars and every financial crisis for 233 years. And then a 28-year-old trader sitting in a Singapore office with almost no supervision quietly destroyed it in less than 2 years. The name of that trader was Leeson, and his story is one of the most extraordinary financial disasters in history. Not just because of how much money was lost, but because of how completely preventable all of it was if anyone had been paying attention. How Leeson got there, what he did, how he hid it, and what it took to finally bring the whole thing crashing down. Leeson was not born into the world of elite banking. He grew up in a working-class family in Watford, England, left school without a college degree, and got his start in finance doing back-office settlement work, the unglamorous administrative side of banking that most people never see or think about. But Leeson was smart and driven, and he worked his way up faster than most people expected. He moved to Barings, one of the oldest and most prestigious merchant banks in Britain, and quickly impressed his managers enough to be sent to Jakarta to help sort out a settlement problem that had been causing headaches for the bank there. He fixed it, impressively, and that performance sent him on a trajectory that would eventually land him in Singapore as the head of Barings Futures, the bank's derivatives trading operation on the Singapore International Monetary Exchange, known as SIMEX. Here is where the first serious warning sign appeared, and most people looking back at this story find it almost impossible to believe that anyone let it happen. Leeson was given authority over both the trading operation and the back-office settlement function. Essentially, he could make trades and then record and verify those same trades himself, with no independent check between the two roles. In banking, separating these two functions is one of the most basic risk management principles that exists. You never let one person control both sides of the ledger. It is the equivalent of letting the same person write checks and sign off on the bank statements. Barings gave Leeson both jobs anyway, and that single decision made everything that followed possible. It started with a small mistake and a decision to hide it instead of report it. In 1992, one of the traders on Leeson's team made an error that cost the bank about £20,000. A small amount by banking standards, the kind of thing that gets reported, absorbed, and moved past. But Leeson chose not to report it. Instead, he used an old error account number 88888, which had been set up previously to handle small settlement errors, and buried the loss inside it. And because he controlled both the trading records and the back-office reconciliation, nobody at Barings in London could see what was sitting in that account. £20,000. That was the seed. That was the beginning of everything that followed. Because once the loss was hidden, Leeson was in a trap of his own making. He needed to generate profits to cover the hidden loss before anyone noticed it. And to do that, he started making bigger and bigger trades, not on behalf of clients, but proprietary bets using the bank's own money, trying to dig his way out of a hole that kept getting deeper the more he tried to fill it. Here is the darkest irony of the whole story, and it is the part that I find genuinely difficult to sit with when I think about it. While account 88888 was quietly hemorrhaging money, Leeson was reporting spectacular profits to London. He was doing this through a specific kind of manipulation. The hidden losses went into account 88888, while the profitable sides of those same trades were reported to London as real earnings. To management at Barings in London, Leeson looked like a genius, a star, the golden boy of their Singapore operation. In 1993, he reportedly generated nearly £10 million in profit for the bank, approximately 10% of Barings' total annual profits from a single trader at a relatively small overseas office. Nobody in London asked hard questions about how a trader in Singapore was generating that kind of return. Nobody flew out to look closely at the actual positions. Nobody wondered whether the risk controls were adequate. Because when someone is making you money and telling you everything is fine, human nature makes it very tempting to believe them. By early 1995, Leeson had been making increasingly large bets on the Japanese stock market, specifically betting that the Nikkei index would rise or at least stay stable. It was an enormous position. On January 17, 1995, the earth moved. Literally, a massive earthquake struck the city of Kobe, Japan, one of the most powerful earthquakes to hit Japan in decades. Thousands of people died. Entire neighborhoods were destroyed, and the Japanese stock market collapsed. The Nikkei dropped sharply in the days that followed, exactly opposite to the direction Leeson had bet on. Instead of cutting his losses at that point, which would have been painful but survivable, Leeson made the decision that sealed everything. He doubled down, then doubled down again. He kept buying more positions, trying to single-handedly push the Nikkei back up through the sheer volume of his purchases, which was both financially reckless and practically impossible for one trader to achieve. On the morning of February 23, 1995, Nick Leeson left a note on his desk at the Singapore office. It said 2 words, "I'm sorry." Then he and his wife packed quickly and left Singapore. They traveled through Malaysia to Brunei and eventually boarded a flight to London via Frankfurt, apparently hoping to get back to Britain before the full scale of the disaster became public. They did not make it. German authorities arrested Leeson at Frankfurt Airport on March 2, 1995, after Singapore issued an international warrant for his arrest. He fought extradition for several months, but eventually he was returned to Singapore, where he stood trial and pleaded guilty to 2 counts of deceiving the bank's auditors and cheating the Singapore exchange. He was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison. While he was in prison, Leeson was diagnosed with colon cancer. He recovered. He served 4 years before being released in 1999 on medical grounds. Back in London, Barings Bank, the institution that had survived everything for 233 years, was sold to the Dutch bank ING Group for exactly £1. A single coin for a bank that had once helped finance entire nations. This is the part of the story I most want people to take away, because it is the part that explains why Barings was not just a victim of one bad trader. Barings failed because its entire risk management structure was either non-existent or was completely ignored by the people responsible for it. Auditors from Barings' own internal audit team visited the Singapore office in 1994 and wrote a report identifying serious concerns about the fact that Leeson controlled both trading and settlement functions. The report recommended that these roles be separated immediately. Nothing was done. The report sat on desks in London, and the recommendation was never implemented. At various points, regulators at Cimex in Singapore sent queries to Barings about unusually large position sizes they were seeing from the Singapore office. The questions were answered with explanations that minimized the concern. Nobody followed up hard enough to discover the truth behind those explanations. At one point, Barings' own Treasury Department was sending Leeson hundreds of millions of pounds in cash to meet margin calls on his positions. Money that should have raised enormous alarm bells about the scale of what he was doing. And yet nobody in London connected the dots between the cash being sent out and the supposed profits being reported back. I want to spend a moment here on what this story actually means beyond the drama of a single rogue trader, because I think it carries lessons that go well beyond the world of investment banking. The first lesson is about unchecked authority. Any system where one person controls both the action and the record of that action is a system that is structurally set up for disaster. This is true in banking. It is true in business. It is true in any organization where accountability is supposed to exist, but the mechanisms for it are not actually functioning. The second lesson is about how success blinds people to risk. When Leeson was producing extraordinary profits, nobody wanted to look too closely at how he was doing it. The profits were real enough from the reports they were reading, and questioning the golden goose felt unnecessary and even ungrateful. But those profits were a fiction built on top of a growing catastrophe, and the reluctance to ask hard questions was the space that catastrophe grew inside. The third lesson is about the danger of trying to hide a small problem. The £20,000 error that started all of this was genuinely small. Reporting it would have been embarrassing. It might have cost Leeson some credibility or even his position, but it would not have destroyed an institution. The decision to hide it instead of face it transformed a small problem into an existential one, which is a pattern that shows up in financial scandals with remarkable consistency. The bank that once helped finance the Louisiana Purchase was sold for £1 in 1995. One coin. For 2 centuries of history and one catastrophic failure of the systems that should have protected it. If this story taught you something real about money and oversight and human nature, please give it a like and share it. Subscribe if you have not already. I will see you in the next one.